because not all of us can change the whole world, but we can change our world a little bit. Welcome back to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast. This week, Augustine is joined by professor, practicing midwife, preceptor, mother, midwifery wisdom mentor, and longtime friend, Mary Harris. Together, Mary and Augustine have a refreshing, authentic conversation that you might experience across a coffee table with two friends. They talk about how important it is to keep both the safe and sacred nature of birth in the community space, adopting technology in midwifery while still keeping the ancient practices, what they see coming in the new generations of midwives, concerns about the future of midwifery, and a fun conversation about Mary's previous studies and profession and her renowned birth tattoos. Grab yourself a delicious drink. Let's sit down for this conversation.
Welcome to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast.
Thank you.
We've been waiting so long to have you as a guest, my dear.
I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Good morning from India. Good late evening from Florida. Well, we have so many things to talk about. You are such an incredible human, mentor, midwife, all the things. I would say, I'm afraid to, I don't even know where to start this conversation, but I thought maybe we could start with a few of your tattoos. And I know that doesn't help for the listeners per se, but we do have folks who watch this on YouTube. You have been collecting tattoos here in the second half of your life. Is that right?
Yes, I got my very first tattoo in 2014. So I have 11 of them now, and I started getting them 10 years ago.
That's just epic. And most of your tattoos are advocacy or educational tattoos, which is even cooler.
Yes, they all have some special meaning to me, and there's a lot of them pertaining to reproductive justice,
which is obviously one of your passions in life and one of the things that you lecture and teach on. So let's do a full intro, because I think I want people to know all the bits about you. And don't go small. Go big, my friend. We want to hear all the things. So right now, you are a practicing midwife in Florida.
Yes.
And a professor, Florida School of Traditional Midwifery. And you are a mentor with Midwifery Wisdom.
Yes.
And you are a mother. And tell us more. What else is about you?
So I have been a midwife since May of 2000. I went to school at the International School of Midwifery. It was a pretty intense 3-year program, and I still wanted to do it when I got to the other side of that. So when I made it through, I said, I really do want to be a midwife. And I did not know that when I was younger. I figured that out later in life. I was a completely different career prior to that. But I have been practicing here, doing home births mostly for 24 years. And I am a mom. So that was one of my big decisions about when am I going to start midwifery school, because the midwife that was with me for my son's birth said, I know how you parent, and you're not going to be happy trying to parent small children while trying to be a midwife. So if you really want to be a midwife, you'll still want to be a midwife when you get older. And that was true. And so when my kids were 4, 6, and 8, I started midwifery school. And I even think that was a little early, but my son is pretty well adjusted. He doesn't remember me not being a midwife. He's the youngest. And he is quite happy and comfortable with my job. So I guess it was the right time, even though sometimes I look back and say I should have waited a little longer. And I really became a midwife because I wanted to promote safety in the birth setting. And that also stems back to my previous career that I can talk about later. But I do teach at the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery. I think it's very important that we change the mentality of how we bring new students into midwifery, and that we bring them in with sustainability in mind, emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, and mentally. So I really try to encourage that through everything that I'm teaching. And then also bringing that into the birth setting when students come with me to a birth and accompany at the birth.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've been most impressed with you, Mary, is your consistent focus on safety while not ignoring the sacred. You have found a way to blend them. And I really love this about you. If we look at like midwifery as a profession, there are kind of two camps. There's the hospital camp that kind of rings the bell of like birth must be safe. And then there's like the community base that rings the bell of like birth must be sacred. And what I've been trying to do for years is like, no, they can be both. Mm-hmm. And that's something like when I met you, I was like, here it is in action. She's doing both. And I just love that. And I love that you've taken it not just in the client interaction, but you've extended that into the student reality. And that is obviously what makes you such an extraordinary preceptor and mentor. Why do you think this isn't common? Why do you think other preceptors aren't doing it this way?
I think that if you come into midwifery with a history of trauma yourself, that it might be hard to think that you can bring safety in. You just want to elevate the birth experience, and you want it to be everything that the client wants, and maybe not be able to look outside that paradigm. I don't know, but I think that might have something to do with it. Like, you want to make somebody's birth not what you had. Like, you want them to get something different than what you had. I don't have any trauma surrounding my birth experiences, and in fact felt very safe with my midwife. So I think that it stemmed from there. I don't like to surrender a lot. The only time I really surrender is in childbirth and pregnancy for myself. And then also being a midwife, it's taught me to surrender and be patient and really just allow things to unfold. But it just brought home for me the idea that we can be 100% safe so that we can surrender, so that we can be listened to, so that we can be consenting and content in our birth experience.
Mm. Yeah, it does. One does flow to the next. And when we don't acknowledge the holistic nature of birth, I think that's when things are really off the rails. And of course, we've seen that in hospital births, right? So many people are speaking up about the lack of autonomy and the lack of sovereignty, mm-hmm. and the violence and the neglect and the abuse and all the things that exist in that space. So we're really banging the bell of like, this needs to change. But you and I have had some private conversations about how actually the home birth and the midwifery community-based space also needs to change, because we have a series of very poor outcomes because we're ignoring or missing the safety piece.
Yes, we have talked about that a lot.
And in Florida, there have been a series of poor outcomes.
Yes.
That have been publicized. So some of those you can go and look up. Let's get into this. Like, why is this happening? What are we doing wrong as a profession? What can we do better?
I think that really honoring and trusting our gut and what we're sensing and feeling, and really doing a deep dive into that, so that the little tiny things that pop up, we pay attention to those. I think it's easy to say, this isn't really anything significant. This will be okay. They really want to be home. I can't transfer just because this little thing popped up. And maybe that little thing is just your early indicator of the bigger thing that's coming. And so really honoring what our gut tells us. I say I listen to my angels, like my angels are constantly around me. And I really try to listen to what they're telling me. And plus, I've also made it my mission to learn heart tones as a separate language, because I think that the baby talks to us a lot through the way its heartbeat sounds. So we should be listening not just to what we're hearing in the heartbeat, but we should be listening to the tone and the tempo and the cadence and the trips. And does it sound like water running? And, like just learning it as a separate language and really honoring what the baby's trying to tell us in the birth.
Brilliant. Yes, I say that a lot. I say that to clients and to students, that the only way we can assess how the baby's doing is their heart rate. Mm-hmm. And specifically their heart rate in relation to the changes of the uterine environment, like the release of waters or contraction patterns. And so we have to have this holistic approach to baby safety. And of course, when we have poor outcomes, that's usually the one that suffers the most.
If we're really listening to the baby, then, and I don't mean over listening, I mean when we're actually listening to what we're hearing with the baby, and we've established a good relationship with the parent, then we're going to be able to communicate with everybody. They're going to feel safe telling us, hey, I don't feel quite right, or, oh, this thing is appearing. And they're going to trust us to know when we need to change location, or we need to change position, or we need to have something else to eat, and just keeping everybody safe in the environment.
Yeah. It is one of the least acknowledged and most important roles of a midwife. Well, so we recently got to spend some time together in Tampa, mentoring skills and drills together. And we're going to again this fall. And while we were there, you said some pretty incredible things. And I wish I had written them down. I just remember being like, oh my God, Mary's a genius. Mary, can you remember what you were saying?
I remember we were talking about removal of the placenta. And we were specifically talking about, I was saying that my fingers can hear and feel if there's a developmental insertion, or if it needs to come out in a different way, or it needs to come out a little slower. And I realized from that I really do, like my fingers really do hear. So the way they touch the the belly, the way the placenta is coming. And I try to teach that to students as well. And I say to them, if you hear this with your fingers, and they always say to me, hear, like, what am I going to hear with my fingers? But just trying to instill in them that sometimes our senses show up in different ways than we expect them to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know that feel/hear when you go, you're like, oh, okay. No, I know that feeling. Like, see, I made a sound because it is a sound. Like, I get it. I totally get it. We do hear with our fingers. I oftentimes talk about seeing with our fingers as well. You're palpating a belly and you're creating a picture.
Exactly.
You're unveiling a picture with your fingers. It is extraordinary. I mean, we giggle about it because it's so familiar, but in fact, what you and I know and feel and hear and see is actually not familiar to most maternity care providers. And I'm not trying to put us on a pedestal. I'm just saying there's so many subtleties to the art of midwifery that I feel like are really being lost. And I also know you to be someone who embraces technology in a lot of ways, knowing that it helps you in your, life, pathway through life, and in your business and various things like that. And so I think you're the perfect person to kind of discuss, like, as we move into this new age where AI and digital everything and and tools and machines and shortcuts and hacks and all the things that are coming, how do we preserve this subtlety, this tips of our fingers, hearing, seeing?
Well, I think that one thing that we need to do is stop negating people's weirdness. Right? Because I was allowed to be weird in my family. We were all weird. We all had our little quirks and our little neurodivergence, and we all had our things. And in my family, nobody would have said to me, "You can't hear with your fingers." They would have just said, "Oh, that's cool. You can hear with your fingers." So I think that as we're embracing all of the new midwives that are coming up, we have to embrace their weirdness and let them know that it's perfectly normal. And then they're going to figure out what their skills are and what their gifts are. And then that's how we preserve it. And I always think about my great-grandma. My great-grandma was born when there were no airplanes and there weren't cars and there weren't antibiotics and women couldn't vote. And she embraced every moment that came along, every new technology, she would embrace it. So I always try to keep that in mind, that we can hold on to the ancient and the sacred while still embracing technology.
This episode is brought to you by Lawnmower Bookkeeping, a virtual bookkeeping firm supporting midwives and doulas. We understand that what you love to do is serve mamas. But sometimes nothing takes you out of your zone of genius like thinking about the money. So while we focus on managing your books, you can focus on client care. By keeping your books clean and tidy, we can help you make confident money moves, pay yourself a consistent salary, proactively save for taxes, and plan for growth. Learn more about working with us by clicking the link in the show notes.
I agree. And in fact, if we just look at midwifery alone, there are very few midwives who don't embrace the Doppler, right?
Right.
Everyone carries a Doppler. Do they use it every time? No, but it's a tool that they embrace and they know how to use, and it has been integrated into their practice. They might also know how to use a fetoscope, and every one of us have put our raw ear right to somebody's belly and heard,
Exactly.
That's an example of the evolution of technology. We can preserve the skill of auscultation even as we make it easier on us and on the moms. And there are many other examples in the profession or in this space where we can make it easier, more efficient, while preserving the skill and the knowledge, as you said, embrace. Do you have another example? What's another part of midwifery that is moving towards technology?
Well, I just wanted to say first that the midwife that trained me told me that when she became a midwife, they didn't even have beepers. So if she, right. So if
that's another example. Yes.
So if she wanted to go somewhere, she had to call all of her clients that were possibly in having a baby and tell them the phone number of where she was going to be. And I just think of that and I say, do we want to do that? No, we have our cell phones. It's just another way of how technology can make our lives easier.
Yeah. And yet we don't stop being on call.
No.
It doesn't change the essence of what we're doing. It just makes it easier. And I think that is a great metric for whether the technology should be adopted or not. Does it change the essence, and does it make it easier?
But I think what happens initially is that we forget that we have boundaries, because, I'm all about boundaries. And we forget that we have boundaries. So are we getting text on our cell phone from 4:00 in the morning until midnight? Or do we have some boundaries surrounding our phone? So I think we all have a tendency at first to take whatever new technology it is and let it overwhelm us. And then when we just sit and think about it, we can figure out, how can this technology benefit me and not overwhelm me?
You speak in my language. This is one of the reasons I love you, Mary. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is part of the work of the modern human, I think, there were, like in parenting, we would call them not natural or logical consequences, right? There were natural and logical boundaries that existed prior to much of the technology advancement. Like there's only one home phone. So, it rings and you pick it up. And if you're not there, you're not there. And if you're eating dinner, you can ignore it. Or if whatever, there were natural boundaries. Nobody can reach you all night long with the texting, right? Because there was this natural boundary. If you weren't in the house, you didn't get the call. But now it's like, attached to us. And so they constantly can reach us. And so your idea is like, what part of this works? What part of this doesn't? And how can I reestablish natural and logical boundaries so that I preserve and maintain my sense of wholeness and self and freedom and whatever other things are important to you? The same is true of food. And I think this is a really interesting exploration I've been doing recently. There were very natural and logical boundaries around food for all of human evolution prior to the very recent industrial age, because it didn't grow near you. You didn't have access to it, right? So we suddenly have this access to everything all the time. And so we have to develop these boundaries around what and how we're using that access, that technology, really. And I think the same is true of midwifery. And this is where midwifery does it better than obstetrics, I think, is that we maintain, or we have done a better job of maintaining the logical and natural boundaries, pathways, limits. And in obstetrics, where the cesarean is across the hall, they use that technology a lot. In obstetrics, where the NST CTG machine is next to the bed, they use that technology a lot because there's no natural logical boundary. There's no reason that they can't find the reason not to. Of course, now we have studies that show that routine monitoring of babies results in more cesareans and not better outcomes. And we can see that a cesarean rate, over 15 or 20% actually causes the very complications the cesareans are trying to prevent and more, like future childbearing and accreta and procreta and previa and all these things. So now we are starting to relearn the boundaries because of obstetrics overuse of them. But this is the part I've always loved about midwifery, is without having to be told, without having to see studies, midwives as a group, as a profession, embrace the idea of natural and logical boundaries or pathways for physiologic birth, and have really, as a whole, pretty much not deviated from that. There are a few things creeping in, for instance, the Doppler charting, right? So keeping the record of that experience has changed dramatically to make our lives easier. And I hope everyone has embraced an EHR platform at this point.
Right.
Right. Why would you not, right? You can access it anywhere and everyone, it's so much more efficient. What other things? What else are we embracing?
I am trying to really understand AI better and really understand how it can help in my practice. And I always try to see who is the next age of person that's coming into my care or who chooses to work with me, because the way they embrace technology is how we have to understand technology, because we have to be able to relate to them. Like, for instance, I know that some of my younger clients will never answer the phone. Like it's either text them and don't leave a message because they won't listen to those either, and just text them. So I had to get very comfortable with responding to a text. I'm in labor in the middle of the night. I wake up to text, and I do tell my clients, listen, don't text me in the middle of the night if it's not an emergency, because I will wake up to your text. But just embracing each new step that somebody's teaching us. I really do love my electronic record because I have everything electronic, and it's so easy to just send it to people.
Share it, or communicate about it, consult about it, all those things. Yeah. Yes. It's a major advancement. And yet there are still people who are critical or against it. And those folks, those late adopters, because eventually, they'll likely join us in this place. Like, how many people are still like, no, a car is not for me. I only ride my horse. Like, there's nobody still doing that, right? So maybe the Amish are still doing that, but it's a very small amount. Most people eventually adopt the technology that the society moves towards because of all the reasons we've said. So those late adopters, what is it that's so different from them compared to, say, you or I, who are like right out at the front of the field trying to figure out how can we make this more efficient and more better?
So I know that nobody that's listening can see my t-shirt, but my t-shirt says introverted but willing to discuss revolution. So my introverted self does not like to be the center of attention. So I found that if I start understanding these things early and start embracing them, that I'm not the one that gets noticed, right? Because I'm already there. So I feel very comfortable bringing these things in from the beginning and trying to understand them so that I can be part of that beginning. And I prefer that. I prefer to be
an early adopter.
Yeah.
Because for you, that's synonymous with the revolution.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It's really fascinating, Mary. I heard you say AI, and I've recently been doing a lot of exploration into using some of the newer AI platforms. Is there any app or program that you're currently trying to learn?
I can't remember the names of them right now, but there are a few. I just signed up with a search engine optimizer that incorporates AI into blog posts and those kind of things. So I'm trying to look at that and see if I really feel comfortable with it and continuing with that.
That's cool. Well, so let's switch gears and let's talk about the new generation of midwives, because you are such a revolutionary. You can't be hemmed in by the generations, actually. It would be hard to say what age midwife you were just listening to this interview, which I think gives you a lot of license to talk about the generations and the evolutions and whatever. And I just wonder, you teach a lot of students, both in your practice and in school. What's different about the new generation of midwives? What are they bringing?
They are bringing this desire to not be put down. And I'm going to try to explain that a little bit better. They stand up for themselves. I was just looking at this post that somebody posted, and it was very right on. She said, I just love my Gen X nurses. She said, a doctor just walked in here, was screaming at us, and my Gen X nurse said, oh my gosh, are you okay? Do you need a hug? That's what my child needs when he's throwing a tantrum. And it just rang true. And then she said to him, I am your coworker. You are not my boss. And I think this whole knowledge that we are equal, and I deserve to be represented, and I deserve to be heard, and I deserve to be treated fairly is really important, and maybe will help change the world. And as the Gen Alphas get older, the Gen Alphas have this feral empathy where they just understand taking care of other people, but they do it with this unstoppable ferocity. And that's also going to be a great change for our world.
It's so inspiring, isn't it?
I know they're promoting to other midwives that we should be paying the people that come and help at our births.
Mm-hmm.
Students, assistants, they should be paid equally. I am promoting that we need to understand that the classroom isn't the same as it always was. We are teaching adults. Adults get to make decisions that could ultimately have consequences, but ultimately probably work for them. And we need to be more flexible. So I'm out there trying to promote that and hope that we can embrace the differences in people instead of trying to squash them and continue the same old paradigm of midwifery.
Yeah. God, wouldn't that be such a welcome change? There are new things coming. I feel like it's on the horizon. Some new leadership and some new change in community-based birth.
Mm-hmm.
But I still worry. I've talked about this actually in the last few podcasts. I'm really concerned about the longevity of community-based midwifery. I'm concerned that we're an endangered species. There are new midwives coming up. That's very exciting. It is a more diverse workforce, finally. That is exciting.
It is exciting.
But at the same time, it feels like the forces have never been greater. The academicization, like you must have so many degrees, you must have this, very linear kind of antique school process, right?
Right.
And also that you must be in an institution. That's right. A very common process. Like, for instance, the only masters that I know of in midwifery, community-based midwifery, not nurse midwifery, which is primarily hospital-based, but in community-based midwifery, educational pathways, as hospital-based midwives are required to have a DNP and, a doctorate and are moving towards this very advanced schooling process, community-based midwives, by and large, are still almost wholly apprentice trained with no actual degree. And those that go on and get advanced degrees, the only master's programs that I know of, there's a clinical master's track at Bastyr. I believe there's one at National College, and I believe there's one at MCU. And then there's a research master's track at Bastyr. That's the one I did. And then the only doctorate in, again, the community-based space is at Jefferson University, and that is a research doctorate. And it gives you a doctor of midwifery, a DM, which is also not a recognized credential, really. But there's no clinical doctorate in this pathway of community-based birth. So even if you went to the top of your profession, you still can't stand on equal footing with other pathways to midwifery.
And a lot of times we just get an associate's degree.
Yeah, or no degree, right? If you just do the PEP process, you have a CPM, which is a certification that has no transferability and no recognizability within an academic pathway. And that's the vast majority of people. And not that I'm talking that down. That is the pathway I went to. I don't feel any negativity about that. But compared to what's happening in, physician spaces, in CNM spaces, CM spaces, even naturopathic doctor midwives, they all have doctorate level. And yet that isn't even an option for practicing CPMs. There's no higher degree. Right. And so what I'm concerned about is as we march further and further, like we're separating, we've been separating for a long time, obviously, but we're separating to this place now where I'm really concerned that they will find a way to invalidate this pathway. They will find a way to invalidate this body of knowledge. And that concerns me very deeply. There's a number of really powerful efforts happening, in New York and in Hawaii to try to reclaim knowledge. And Massachusetts now has a bill on the table. And there's a lot of movement. But as people have noticed over the last 10 years, a lot of the states that have added licensure have done it only through a scholastic process, only including a MEEK education, not this apprenticeship model. And yet, as I think you feel the same way, I would say most of my knowledge that became wisdom came through the act of actually practicing the craft of midwifery, not reading
Yes,
about it.
absolutely. And working with different mentors that,
Seeing it in action,
being
living classroom.
Living it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that living classroom has no value in this society. It has no credit, no credential, no acknowledgement even. And even more than that, most of the time, if you talk to an academicized person, they actually put down that process of apprenticeship learning.
Right.
They invalidate it.
And also in this process, we're totally ignoring different learning styles of different people. If they have a neurodivergence, if they have ADHD, if they have executive functioning syndrome, whatever it is that's happening, we are traumatizing people and stressing them out through this educational process because we're forcing them to be in this square peg in a round hole and just forcing them into it and not really honoring the fact that there are many, many ways that we can learn and still get to the same conclusion.
So true. And I would argue that it isn't just forcing them to be in this path, it's actually excluding them. Because many people cannot learn in the traditional pathway. That's why they're midwives,
Right. And they really try to go down this path and then end up leaving because there's no honoring of their style and how they should be taught.
Yeah.
And we lose a lot of really fantastic people in our field that way.
Yeah, I agree. So this is what I am. I'm really worried about the future. I think you and I are both doing things to try to address that. But what could someone listening, what are some action items? I don't know. I think about this all the time. You're such a deep thinker, Mary. Maybe you don't have an answer right now, but this is what I'm actively trying to solve or think about.
Well, definitely not just sitting on the sidelines. Figure out what is the midwifery in your state. Where can you help? And maybe your helping is that you teach at a midwifery school because you feel like that can help, or you organize peer review in your community so that you can bring your community together to work more jointly as a whole instead of a lot of individuals in the same space. Because not all of us can change the whole world, but we can change our world a little bit.
Hey. So beautiful. Well, what else do you wish to share before we end this, Mary?
Well, do you want to know about my tattoo?
Yes, tell me all about it. And also you said you'd tell us about your previous profession. Tell us about that.
Oh, let me talk about that first. Okay, so here's my funny path to midwifery. So I grew up in a landlocked small town in the Midwest, and I was freezing, and I figured out when I was in third grade that I just really had to leave there, and that became my whole life's journey, was to figure out how to live in a warmer spot. So in that process, I also knew that I wanted to be a marine biologist. So I got into the University of Miami and came to Florida to be a marine biologist. 2 years into the program, my professor sat me down and had a come awakening talk and said, "You can't even stand on a moving dock without vomiting. We don't think this is the right profession for you." And at that moment, yes, I'm so motion sensitive. So at that moment, I knew it was true. So 2 years into the program, I really sat down and thought, what do I want to do? And I really wanted to work in the healthcare field. And I became a therapeutic recreation specialist. And I worked with a lot of different populations, but my favorite population that I worked with was traumatic brain injury rehab. And I worked in a rehab unit with an OT, a PT, a speech therapist, a cognitive therapist, and me. And I was part of the coma stimulation program. I did orientation group every morning. I helped start the community reentry program with the occupational therapist so that we could get people back into the community. And I loved it. I stopped doing that job when I was pregnant, when I left because I had my oldest daughter. I did have the privilege of being able to stay home with my children. So that's what I chose to do. But once I found midwifery and wanted to be a midwife, I realized that traumatic brain injury and midwifery, in the very underlying part of it, is the same for me. So you help somebody be safe in their transition. You see somebody come in one being, and by the end of the journey, you see them as another complete being, and you get to see them transition and change through this experience, and just grow and be different people. And so I realized that deepest level was the same, even though the jobs were completely different.
That's extraordinary. That is pattern recognition. That's awesome. That's extraordinary. And the shift happened when you were having your own children?
Yes. So I had a really amazing OB. She had to leave obstetrics because the hospital was making too many regulations on her, and she couldn't practice the way that she wanted to. She had to leave Florida, and she went to another state that let her still practice the way she wanted. I had a 21-hour labor with my oldest daughter, 18 hours of back labor, and not once was it suggested that anything would happen other than I was going to have a vaginal delivery. And in fact, she said to me when I said, am I going to have a C-section? She said, no, honey, if you have a C-section, that's a failure on my part. You're just having a baby. So that was fantastic. For my second one, I wanted to birth at home. Their dad wasn't quite ready for that because that was a long, hard labor for him. It was a long, hard labor for me, but he didn't like seeing that. So my second daughter, my entire labor is 3 hours, 20 minutes. And he had promised me that if we stayed home, we could stay home as long as possible and not go to the hospital so soon. But what he did not recognize was that I was in full-blown transition trying to have this baby. And he was like, no, honey, I told you we would stay home as long as possible. I finally convinced him to call the doctor. She heard me in the background. And she said, could you please bring her to the hospital? If she's less than 6 centimeters, I'll send you back home. And when I got there, she was waiting at the elevator with gloves on, and my daughter was born 22 minutes later. So the third time I said, now can I have my home birth? I'm not getting back in a car again. So after that experience where I just felt so, the lighting was different and there weren't a lot of people coming in and out of my room, and nobody was touching me when I didn't want to be touched. And I knew I wanted to be a midwife. And that was the transition. And I still wanted to be a midwife 4 years later. So that's when I started midwifery school. And the midwifery school was 5 minutes from my house. It was just sort of everything just fell into place. Like the universe was just putting it there for me so that it worked.
That's awesome. And we're so glad you followed that path. Thank you. Okay, ready for some tattoos? You're going to show us and tell us what you got?
Okay, so I'll talk about the reproductive justice tattoos first. So on my right wrist, I have the anatomy of the clitoris, and that stands for bodily autonomy. Yes. On my right arm, I have my right upper arm. I have a placenta with a cord that goes all the way down my forearm, and the placenta stands for the ability to choose to have or not have children. And then I have on my left upper arm a placenta, a uterus. And the uterus stands for the ability to live in a safe environment and be able to raise yourself and your child in a healthy environment. And I chose a uterus, well, because I'm a midwife, but also because I say that some people have only ever felt safe in the uterus and some people not even in the uterus. So it's a reminder. And then on my left forearm, I have the chemical composition of misoprostol and mifepristone. The person that does most of my tattoos was on a camping trip, and Roe v. Wade was overturned, and I sent her a message, "Oh my God, I need my tattoo." And she said she knew at that moment what had happened, and when I got back, we did the tattoo. It's just my protest tattoos. And then I have a bunch of other ones that just have special meaning to me, but not related to reproductive justice.
It's really powerful. There aren't very many people that are so clear and so clearly proud of their beliefs and their work in the world. And you are definitely one of those people.
And then this one tattoo, thank you. This one tattoo that's really nice. This is my favorite prayer. It's the English transliteration of the word Shehekiano in Hebrew, and it's my favorite prayer. And the prayer says, "Thank you for giving me life, sustaining me, and bringing me to this moment." And that prayer, I say at every single birth that I'm at. And usually it's just to me. I don't say it out loud, but I recognize that prayer every single time I'm at a birth.
Mary, thank you for your wisdom, your midwifery wisdom.
Thank you.
I'll see you in November.
Yes. And I just want to say thank you for making me okay, right? Because all of the weird things about me have clearly been honored through Midwifery Wisdom Collective. And not that I worried about my weird things, because I embrace them, I'm fine. But just to see that I'm not the only one with some of these weird things and these beliefs, and teaching me that it was really okay to have those boundaries that I had when everybody else was telling me that sometimes they were not necessary, but I knew they were. So thank you for all of that as well. I'll see you in November.
See you in November. Conference awaits us. Love you, sweet.
Bye. Love you too. Bye-bye.